California riots rage on. We have new data about how the American people feel about it. We have a bombshell new report about a threat from China you might not have heard about. The return of foreign perverts trying to meddle in our elections, and new data about President Trump, inflation, and China trade deals. All of that and so much more today on 10 Minute Drill.
Everybody get up, get up.
The story of America is the story of an adventure.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
We are a nation under God, and I believe God intended for us to be free.
On Tuesday, we talked about the growing riots in California and the dangers that they present. Those have continued into this Thursday morning. We're going to talk a lot about Karen Bass through this episode, but here she is on Tuesday night calling for a curfew.
I wanted to let the city know that I have declared a local emergency and issued a curfew for downtown Los Angeles.
The other thing that's really escalated is the violence. We have seen now video released by DHS of one protester, an illegal immigrant, attempting to throw a Molotov cocktail at federal agents. We're also continuing to learn more about the targets of the ICE enforcement operations, including, for example, one detailed in this exchange. This from Aaron Reichlin-Melnick, who not only helps lead one of the top pro-illegal immigration groups that are supporting these riots, but he also is regularly called to testify on Capitol Hill on illegal immigration. He says ICE's public safety narrative often collapses under scrutiny. The guy on the left was a prison firefighter, a job not available to safety threats. He was granted bond from ICE detonation in 2022. Similarly, the man on the right was paroled by California in 2022 for good behavior. That sounds all nice and good, but Bill Melugin came in with a fact check of his own, saying, "You can't be serious. The guy on the right is a convicted murderer, and the guy on the left has convictions for shooting into an occupied house, willful child cruelty, DUI, assault with a firearm, and has had a deportation order since 2020. You're saying ICE should not arrest him?" This exchange really is important because it highlights the fact that there is a narrow segment of people that believe that these most violent criminal illegal immigrants should be allowed to stay in our country. We've talked a lot here about the fact that when it comes to support for deportations of anyone with a violent criminal record, about 95% of the country agrees we should remove them from our country. We appear to have found the other 5%. And unfortunately, they're in high positions of power in Los Angeles and in this debate. But to look at how the rest of the American people are feeling about this, here's a couple quick polling points. Insider Advantage polling found that 59% support President Trump sending in the National Guard to restore order here. RMG found that 58% continue to support President Trump's deportation agenda. That poll was taken even as this operation was being carried out. And thirdly, this nugget from CNN that I thought was really important.
Closest to or trust more in immigration. You go back to 2020. Democrats, get this, held a 32-point lead on this issue. Immigrant voters were in the Democratic camp. Jump forward to 2024, 2025. Look at that shift, a 40-point shift to the right among immigrant voters.
So you'll note that is a 40-point swing. Legal immigrants who came through the process, who waited in line, no longer side with Democrats who support open borders and support letting any sort of violent criminal illegal immigrants stay here. And I think that that's easy to understand when you consider if you wait in a line for something, whether it's at the grocery store or whether it's, for a ride at Disneyland, and you have family members waiting somewhere in that line behind you, when you see a large group come in and try and cut, you're not happy about that. You don't cheer them on because they're complicating the process for those you care about who are trying to come in the right way. And so it's easy to understand why they would feel that way. But I want to take a minute to really look at the failures of leadership from both Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom. First, Karen Bass, we followed a sort of Baghdad Bob progression. Last week, as these riots were really beginning to start, as the ICE operations were being carried out, her first reaction was, we don't need ICE. We don't need ICE raids.
None of this needed to happen. Why did we need to have raids here?
What we saw over the next few days is her messaging shift as she had more and more difficulty trying to argue that everything happening was peaceful and happy and hunky-dory.
So I call on all Angelenos to continue expressing your right, your anger, your outrage, but to do it peacefully.
Then we saw the progression on Tuesday night when she finally had to acknowledge the fact that these protests had turned violent, there had been looting, and so much more.
Many businesses have now been affected by or vandalized Last night, there were 23 businesses that were looted.
But the other failure in leadership that people really saw prominently here was from Governor Gavin Newsom. Here's him on Tuesday night.
I know many of you are feeling deep anxiety, stress, and fear, but I want you to know that you are the antidote to that fear and that anxiety.
As you watch this, it's pretty clear he's trying really, really hard to work up those tears. I am a little bit uncomfortable watching it. I don't know whether he tried to just put in eye drops beforehand, but if you've watched him over the last 3 or 4 days, each day he has tweeted about President Trump more than 30 times. Very few tweets have been about needing to protest peacefully. Everything he has talked about has been hyper-focused on President Trump. And it's having the effect that he wants, where a lot of media is now talking about him as the face of the resistance. If you've just had your business burned down, if you've had it vandalized, or if you're a victim of the numerous violent crimes carried out by illegal immigrants, how do you feel when you see this city burning and see your governor not talking about that, but spending all of his time talking about political fights with President Trump? Normally, when someone tries to use an event or an inflection point to launch a campaign, to position themselves as a leader, they pick one where they look good to a wide range of people, where they look like a leader to the entire country. Gavin Newsom is siding with rioters. We just talked about the polling that shows the fact that overwhelming majorities oppose these riots, oppose these protests. But Gavin Newsom's calculation here isn't about being president of the entire country. Right now, he's trying to position himself within a Democrat primary as the face of the anti-Trump resistance. But what he is forgetting is that it's the exact trap Kamala Harris fell into herself in 2020 and leading up to, her run for president, when every position she took wasn't about serving the American people or creating the best policy. It was solely about a counter to President Trump. For her, in 2024, that manifested itself in support for things like taxpayer-funded sex change surgeries for detained illegal immigrants, open borders, a number of different things that were incredibly unpopular. But she picked them because she thought it would rally the activist part of their base to her. Gavin Newsom right now is standing with violent criminal illegal immigrants and rioters that are trying to throw Molotov cocktails at law enforcement. It is a very short-sighted plan that might help him with the most rabid part of the Democrat activist base, but anyone with any kind of long memory will note the fact that this is going to destroy any future potential at a general election or anything beyond what he's doing right now. So I think it's an incredibly short-sighted strategy, and I think as you watch him hyper-focus every tweet about President Trump, there is a massive, massive need for local leadership in California, and they're not getting it. Moving on, really positive news for President Trump. On Wednesday morning, the new Consumer Price Index report came out, showing that inflation continues to decrease, showing that the economy really is working.
We got another month of positive inflation news.
Market indicators are showing us positive numbers month over month. We've seen it with the jobs numbers. We're now seeing it with these inflation numbers.
At the same time, new approval ratings coming out from Morning Consult, which normally is not a very Republican-friendly pollster, showing that President Trump's approval rating is at its highest point since the end of January, a 4-point rise from May. One thing we talk about a lot here is the massive disconnect. If you watch a lot of mainstream media, you might think that President Trump is really struggling, that everyone is opposed to everything he's doing. But there is a disconnect there, and normal people are experiencing the Trump presidency a lot differently than how newsrooms are often representing it, and that's an important thing to remember. Another positive nugget for him came Wednesday morning when he announced they had reached a China trade deal.
President Trump says the U.S. and China finally agreed to a trade deal. The only finishing touch is approval from him and President Xi Jinping of China.
So you'll continue to hear a lot more about the broad contours of this deal, both the tariff levels, but also some of the key sticking points that they're trying to continue to iron out that we might have a path forward on. Things like rare earth minerals, things like materials that we rely on for our supply chains, but also things like our exports and the rules around them. But as we talk about China trade deal, there is a new bombshell report today from a group called State Armor that warns about the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party's influence in our own climate debate. This report, focused on a group called Energy Foundation China, reveals how the CCP is not only infiltrating American universities, but also manipulating liberal politicians like Gavin Newsom to undermine U.S. energy independence, to boost China's stranglehold on the global green energy market, and in a lot of ways to put America behind. This story was covered in Fox News by Andrew Mark Miller, and it highlights, again, that the Chinese Communist Party is working with liberal climate groups in the United States to try and weaken our energy industry and help China. They are behind so much of the effort to force a green transition that the United States is not ready for, while China is making new coal-powered plants and really digging in on the fossil fuels we know that we rely on. So again, Gavin Newsom and other liberal Democrat leaders have a lot of explaining to do about how they have, whether accidentally or on purpose, been used by the Chinese Communist Party to hurt America and help China on this green energy front. Earlier this week, Senator Cory Booker tweeted out a long thread with polling data from a group called Families Over Billionaires. We've talked a lot here about the group Families Over Billionaires. They are actually funded by billionaires, including George Soros and, who we talked about before, foreign pervert Hans-Jörg Wyss. Now, Cory Booker in his thread is attempting to attack the, quote, big beautiful bill, the Republican reconciliation bill, using polling from this left-wing dark money group funded by George Soros and foreign perverts to try and discredit the bill and the massively popular middle-class tax cut and efforts to make Medicaid work better for the American people. But at the same time, there is a new op-ed that I want to point you to from Jason Sneed of Honest Elections Project and Caitlin Sutherland of Americans for Public Trust, detailing how Mark Elias, you'll remember that Mark Elias is the go-to attorney for the left on all of their dark money efforts, whether it's Arabella Advisors or their efforts to try and ban things like voter ID. In this case, there have been efforts state by state to ban foreign donors from influencing local elections, like foreign pervert Hans-Jörg Wyss. Elias is suing to allow Hans-Jörg Wyss to be able to continue to influence U.S. elections with his funding and donations. Sheldon Whitehouse, unfortunately, could not be reached for comment on this issue, but here's what it might look like if he were. That is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us here on 10 Minute Drill. Please subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, leave a review, tell your friends. Thanks so much for joining us.